Morning burned through thin clouds and laid a bleached hush across the Badland hills. Each color fled except the dull brass of summer, and every living thing kept its shade. The ranch house crouched alone on a knoll, boards gray, windows dull, as if it had chosen forget sound. Inside, the man who owned it, Morgan Wade, moved from wall to wall by muscle memory only, mine left somewhere with 2 cedar crosses a mile east. He hitched the wagon just after noon, steering toward town for salt and nails he barely needed. Heat trembled above the road. Flies formed a sound like static. 10 miles in, the mare shied, nostrils flaring toward a shaped slump beside a mesquite stump. A woman lay there, dressed the color of dust, skin cracked by sun, one palm half buried in the roadside silt, as though she tried to scoop herself onward after strength failed. Morgan halted. Silence pressed him. Half of him wanted to ride on. The other half had once known mercy. He lifted her carefully, so light it felt wrong, and settled her across a sack of oats. By the time he reached the porch, her breaths came in thin ribbons. He carried her inside, laid her on a cot in use since the fire, and poured a dipper of pump water past her cracked lips. No name fell from them. Only the soft click of her swallow answered. Twice that night he woke to fever mutterings, but no words he understood. He set a lantern on the floor, let its faint glow lick the rafters, and waited. At dawn, she rose. Not fully, just to sit, eyes open, gaze sliding over the one-room space. Cold stove, crooked chair, dust film on the mantel. She drank from the tin cup he left, blinked at him once, then slept until noon. The third day she managed the porch, bare feet stepping slow across boards sun-bleached to parchment. She watched the horizon as if expecting some distant confirmation that breath remained worthwhile. He mended a harness a few paces away, feeling the shift in gravity her silent presence created. No question of departure came, no invitation offered. She simply stayed. By habit, she began to feel emptiness. A pot set on the stove, the single curtain shaken free of grit, a handful of cornmeal stirred into water for a thin cake. Each gesture was small, and wordless yet relit corners long surrendered to shadow. Morning bled into morning. Morgan's chores, feed, fence, pump, repeat, slipped into a rhythm punctuated by the rustle of her dress, the scrape of broom straw. At dusk she carried a pail to the garden plot long dead, knelt, pressed fingertips into powder, lifted them, let the dust fall back like faint hope returning to earth. She never opened the trunk that held memories he avoided, never crossed into the corral, without offering the mare her palm first, letting the animal breathe her story before he dared. She claimed nothing, yet everything shifted a fraction toward waking. Weeks passed. He tracked them only by the fit of his grief. Each sunrise had pinched less. Each sunset left room for one extra breath. Sometimes he caught himself watching her profile against the doorway, trying to read what pain or promise lived behind those steady eyes. The gaze held secrets but never debt. One evening, storm clouds rumbling far to the south, she stepped outside barefoot, paused at the edge of the dooryard, light crooked through amber dust, turning each mote to gold. She lifted her hem just enough, placed one foot flat on the powder, then the other, shoulders loosening as if a hinge found oil. Without signal or song she began to turn, slow, deliberate. Arms rose, skirt swept in a circle, dust swirled up to greet her ankles. Again she turned, a shade faster, hair uncoiling, toes carving loops that released tiny clouds around each pivot. There was no audience but dying light, and one man welded to the porch rail, yet her motion held the honesty of prayer. He felt it first as an ache, then as a crack, the internal break of something long calcified. It hurt, then warmed, then bloomed. Reflex set his hand to his hat brim. Respect made him lift it free. He held it against his heart. Not in welcome, not in courtship, only in acknowledgement that life had dared walk back into the yard on bare feet. She slowed, breath steady, dust settling like soft applause upon her shoulders. A final turn, a stillness, a sigh. She faced the porch, eyes bright but unreadable. No smile asked for answer, no gesture required comment. He found one anyway. A slow tilt of the mouth, foreign to his face yet true. Night folded shut. She washed her feet in the basin, vanished inside. He remained on the steps long after the lamp snuffed out. Stars pricking the sky. He had not bothered to examine, since the crosses were new. The air tasted of earth and distant thunder, of something returned unnamed. He inhaled once, full, lungs stretching wide, as if remembering their original purpose. Dust settled and waited. Sun pulled thin silver threads across each dawn, and the woman wove them into the house without saying a word. She rose early, lifting the kettle before he left his bunk, stoking the stove until cedar crackled like small applause in the hush. He would find a tin cup placed at the same spot on the table, handle turned toward him, surface fogged by steam, then see her beyond the doorway, sleeves rolled, water in the sage that still clung to the yard's hard crust. When Morgan rode fence, she trailed a measured distance behind, gathering wind-snapped wire, coiling it neat, setting it by posts like quiet punctuation. At noon, she settled beneath a mesquite, wrote nothing in the dust, simply breathed in cadence with cicadas while he chewed jerky Gonda leather. No glance asked permission, no gesture refused it. They shared shade the way two tired drifters share a road, parallel, neither converging nor straying. Inside, evening softened. She swept ash from the hearth, patched a moth hole in the lone curtain with thread, pulled from her own hem. Morgan would polish the lantern glass, set it back, and notice how its glow now reached corners where night once pooled. Still he kept to one chair, she to the other, the distance as fixed as fence wire yet no longer barbed. Weeks slid like beads. He marked them in small repairs finished sooner than habit predicted. Roof shingle replaced, tack oiled, water trough scrubbed clean of algae. Each task ended under the brush of her silent presence, and grief, long rigid, shifted inside him, creaking like rafters that remembered how to flex with wind instead of splinter. She never touched his tools until he laid one aside, never took loaf until he nudged it closer. But each night, after lamps winked out, he heard bare saws pass his door, light enough to be thought, firm enough to be real. Once he opened a plank a crack. She stood on the porch, hair unbound, neck lifted to constellations, as if listening for a tune only starlight carried. He closed the door again, heartbeat louder than crickets, and slept without dreams of fire. Late in the second month, the sky shifted, sunsets bleeding amber deeper, dust rising softer. The woman finished sweeping, stepped onto hardpan barefoot, paused. Yellow horizon backlit her hair. Her skirt, washed thin, fluttered like a sparrow's wing. She pressed one foot into powder, lifted the other, and let arms float outward. No music, no witness expected, yet her body answered something unseen. Slow spin, dust plume curling, heel grazing earth in a spiral gesture that traced hope across ground baked indifferent for years. Morgan stood in the doorway, wrench slack in his fist, lung forgetting sorrow long enough to fill with raw awe. He did not move closer. He only removed his hat, slow, deliberate, brow bare to twilight. His mouth, an used upward curve, found its way into a quiet smile. Dust settled around her ankles, haloing each step until evening swallowed color. When she finally stilled, breath rhythmic, she dipped her head once toward the doorway, acknowledgement, not invitation, then disappeared inside. Morgan replaced his hat, stared at footprints glowing faint in gathered starlight. Something brittle within him clicked, loosened, small fracture opening toward air. Canyon wind shifted, carrying a scent he had not known since before the graves. Warmed earth edged with distant rain. He inhaled, felt the chest he'd left locked begin, shy, uneven, to breathe like new-turned soil after long drought. Clouds gathered for days before yielding, stacking slate on slate until the horizon bruised. Morgan watched from the porch rail, hammer idle in his fist, while she hauled the last tins from the smokehouse, setting them on the table like chips in an unanswered game. Wind shifted, the smell of river mud, lightning metal. She touched her brow once, an unspoken warning, then crossed the yard to the sagging roofline where a single cedar plank still gaped. They worked side by side in shrinking light. He steadied the ladder. She climbed, nails gripped between teeth, hair whipping each time thunder rolled closer. No words rose above the wind, only the rhythm of hammered wood, a pulse steadier than his own heartbeat had been in years. One final strike, plank sealed. She descended, boots sinking in first drops of rain the dust had seen since last spring. Storm hit like a reckoning. Sheets of water erased the yard in minutes. Carved channels through powder, drummed the roof with a fury that once would have sent him to the cellar clutching memories of fire. He stood at the window instead, feeling the house quiver yet hold. She moved room to room, checking seams, stuffing rags where ghost drafts wove. Lamplight flickered across her profile, determined, alive. Midnight. Thunder crashed, so close the lantern jumped. He found her on the back step, dress plastered, face upturned into torrents. Rainwater cascaded off eaves, thrummed on empty barrels. She stepped barefoot into the yard, into puddles that swallowed dust. Arms lifted, palms open. She spun once, slower than the sunset dance, but with the same surrender. He watched as water pasted her fringe to skin, yet she smiled with her eyes, as if greeting an old friend at last allowed home. He fetched an oilcloth, but stopped short of draping it. Instinct told him some baptisms must finish unassisted. Instead, he rolled the barrels forward, catching runoff, feeling the weight of each gallon thud the staves. Music of stored fortune. By dawn, the storm crawled east, leaving skies scrubbed blue. Mud glistened where dust died. She knelt near the porch, pressed fingers into soaked earth, then reached for a burlap pouch. Seeds discovered in the smokehouse, sunflowers forgotten by his wife. She placed one in his palm, curled his fingers as though closing a promise, then planted her own. They worked in silence, seeds dropping into mud like small suns. When the row finished, she filled a tin cup at the rain barrel, watered the trench, smiled faintly at how water no longer seemed an enemy. Afternoon warmed. She set the violin on the porch rail, tune against the breeze. Notes drifted, soft, tentative, matching the drip of eaves. Morgan sat on the step, boots drying, arms loose across knees. The song was neither lament nor reel. It was the simple shape of daylight after survival, a melody with room to breathe. He caught his reflection in the rain barrel, beard untamed, eyes no longer haunted but wondering. When she ended the piece, he rose, fetched Mary's battered coffee mug from its shelf, filled it with clear water, and carried it to the newly sown row. Together they poured that cup with seeds, christening the buried sons. Night settled gentle. Frogs croaked in places that had been dusked hours earlier. Inside, she hung the damp dress by the stove. He draped his hat beside it, brim dripping. They shared bread in quiet. Before lanterns dimmed, she took chalk to her strip of bark, wrote a single word, set on the table for him to find at first light. Grow. Rain had found the house, and something inside its owner obeyed. Late summer baked the valley in brass, yet green insisted. Then sunflower stalks elbowed to the hardened row, leaves wide as open palms. Each dawn she bent to check their progress, fingertip brushing velvet underside, listening for some private rhythm. Morgan watched from the porch, one boot resting on a rail, coffee cooling forgotten. Each new leaf felt like a heartbeat he no longer feared to count. Tools found harmony in two sets of hands. She guided the plow's nose while he steadied handles, furrows straight as seam lines. He split fence rails. She shaved splinters, stacking them into neat ladders of cedar scent. Ashes from old stove fires fed soil, turning yesterday's ache into tomorrow's dark richness. One evening, clouds bruised the horizon purple, but held their water. Heat settled heavy. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, pacing. She stepped into the yard, unpinned her braided hair, and shook it free. Dust rose in a hush, the earth remembering softness. Barefoot, she walked between sunflower stems, skirt brushing leaves, skin catching errant gold pollen. She reached the row's end, paused, and turned. Slow orbit, arms following, skirt lifting a whisper of wind. Sun lay low, light thick as honey. Dust spiraled up to meet her again. This time Morgan left the porch. Boots scuffed once against packed dirt, then stopped. Hat lifted, tucked under his arm. He didn't cross the invisible circle her movement etched. He only stood at its rim, pulse thudding, not with grief nor with fear, but with raw attention. She pivoted, heel digging a crescent, gaze brushing past him without anchoring, as though the dance belonged not to watcher nor dancer, but to dust discovering flight. When she slowed, breath shimmering, dusk finally slipped its last copper coin beyond the ridge. Crickets tuned up, frogs marked time. She stepped back onto the hard pan, pressed one palm flat to the earth, grounding the moment. He exhaled, felt night air filling new chambers in his lungs. Inside, lamplight folded over wood grain walls. She poured water into Mary's mug, set it before the stove to warm. Morgan reached for the violin, the first time his hands had cradled its curve. Strings hummed under tentative pressure, bow drawing one long line that hovered between note and sigh. She stood close, listening not to melody but to courage taking shape. He played 3 faltering bars. She answered by resting the mug on the table, laying her scarred fingers lightly across the strings to still them. Gentle reminder that new music could wait until breath found ease. They ate in silence, bread dipped in stew spiced with green fire from the garden's single pepper. Outside, owls conversed in low syllables. Inside, the lamp burned steady. Later, she wrote on bark a word he had not used since graves were fresh. Tomorrow. Under it she chalked a half-circle sun, raised short and tentative. He took the chalk, placed a tiny shoot beneath the sun, 2 leaves raised, seedling bowing toward light. They left the slate propped on the windowsill, where moonlight floated over it like a blessing. Before sleep, heat finally broke. Wind pushed through screens, tasting of distant water. He lay on his cot, eyes tracing the pattern the lamp left on the ceiling, heartbeat syncing with the slow creak of floorboards as she crossed the doorway for one last look at stars. Outside, dust settled around sunflower stalks, their heads bowing under new weight of promise. Inside, grief no longer gnawed. It sat quiet, digestible, part of him yet no longer king. Morning waited beyond the ridge, carrying whatever tomorrow dared to ask. He felt ready, not for answers, but for the simple act of waking to find quiet footsteps and the soft ache of a heart still learning the shape of its own dance. Morning cut the horizon open with a blade of gold, and the valley spilled brightness instead of dust. Sunflowers stood shoulder-tall now, heads heavy, tilting east in slow salute. She brushed dew from their crowns, collecting seeds that rattled like soft coins in her palm. Morgan stacked hay at the barn's new wall. Each forkful rose easy, weight of grief traded for honest labor. No calendar marked the day, yet both felt its edge, the turning point between what had grown and what must be kept. She spread burlap on the porch boards, poured seed across it, fingers sifting chaff from promise. He filled the root cellar with squash, rye, jars of creek cold water. Quiet expanded but did not swallow them. It breathed. Near noon she lifted the violin to her shoulder, tuned by instinct, drew a ribbon of sound that drifted through open windows, coaxing him outside. He leaned on the gate, hat shielding his eyes, and listened. Notes traced lazy arcs over the pasture, settling on the mare's ears, on the kittens dozing in hay, on his own chest where pulse met melody without flinch. She stopped mid-phrase, set the violin aside, stepped barefoot into the yard, dust now a memory beneath summer grass. With one hand she gestured nothing grand, just a lift of fingers toward him, a question carved from sunlight. He removed his gloves, crossed a small distance. They stood face to face, the hush louder than storm. She placed a sunflower seed in his scarred palm, closed his fingers. Then, without music, she moved. Slow turn, heel tracing the grass, arms unfolding like petals opening. This dance was softer than the first, less wind, more gravity. He watched the rhythm settle into the earth, felt it climb through his boots. When she completed the circle, he matched her step with one of his own. Boot heel met soil, shoulders loosening by fractions. They moved nowhere, yet the yard widened, sky bending lower to sea. Sun topped its arc. Shadows shrank at their feet. They stopped, breathing in tandem, and he noticed dust motes suspended between them, last remnants of a long drought caught in pause. She reached up, brushed the speck from his beard, then traced a line from his chest to ground. Root found, root held. Evening cooled. They tied bunches of sunflower heads upside down in the attic to dry, seeds ticking like small clocks as they settled. Later he unrolled canvas on the porch, painted with rough strokes the curve of distant hills, the silhouette of a woman turning barefoot in late light. She watched, hands folded, eyes reflecting lamp glow, and when he finished she pressed chalk to bark one final time. Enough! He smiled, word perfect. Together they carried the canvas inside, leaned it near the hearth where flames could whisper color into paint. Night slipped soft across the valley. Owls traded secrets. Crickets stitched him to darkness. They sat on the steps, shoulders touching. No need for song, no need for talk. The air already full of all they had learned. That dust can dance. That grief can seed. That silence can mend what fire breaks. Under a quilt of quiet stars, they breathed, simple, steady, shared, and let the harvest moon crown the house with pale gold, sealing the season's work and the long road from forgetting back to life. If her barefoot dance shook the dust off your own heart, tap subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments. The first silent sunrise, the stormlit roof work, or the final harvest dance, which scene made you breathe deeper? Your voice keeps these prairie stories riding on.